As the fleet prepared to leave Earth's orbit, Commander Carter stood on the bridge of the Pioneer, looking out at the vastness of space. The stars seemed so far away, yet they were closer than ever before. Earth had sent its weakest fleet to help the Exorcan, but Carter had a feeling they were about to show the galaxy what humanity was really capable of. The human fleet had never been more underestimated. To the Exorcan, sending Earth's weakest ships was a baffling decision, but it was a decision they had to accept. Commander Bethany Carter had been given the task of leading this small fleet into uncharted danger, armed with little more than outdated technology, and a crew that was still finding its feet in the vastness of space. The fleet gathered at Earth's edge, its ships looking modest compared to the might of the Exorcan Armada. The Pioneer, a cruiser just under 300 meters long, was the flagship. It was a ship that had seen better days. Its hull was scratched, its weapon systems were antiquated, and its engines sputtered when pushed too hard. But Carter knew her crew, and she knew that the ship's true strength lay not in its weapons or size, but in the hearts of the people aboard. Around the Pioneer were 4 other ships, each smaller and less capable than the next. The Vanguard, a destroyer that had once been part of Earth's frontline defense, but was now barely fit for duty. The Mercury, a transport ship that had been refitted with weaponry in a desperate attempt to boost its effectiveness. The Drake, a reconnaissance vessel with outdated stealth capabilities. And finally, the Eagle, a patrol ship that had become notorious for its low-speed maneuvers and poor handling. To an outsider, this fleet might have looked like a joke, a collection of relics, too slow and weak to ever pose a real threat. The Exorcan had no idea what they were up against. Commander Carter stood on the bridge of the Pioneer, observing the fleet as it slowly assembled. The crew was already in their positions, running pre-flight checks and preparing for the long journey ahead. There was no fanfare, no heroic speeches. Carter preferred to keep things simple, and this was no exception. "Captain, all ships are ready," Lieutenant Ross, the Pioneer's communications officer, reported. Carter nodded, her face set in determination. She had no illusions about the challenges ahead. The Vikor were not like any enemy they had faced before. Their hive mind made them unpredictable, and their ability to adapt to every tactic was their greatest strength. Earth's fleet wasn't built for a battle like this. It was built for something else entirely. "Let's make sure we're ready for anything," she said, her voice steady but filled with purpose. As the fleet jumped into hyperspace, the stars stretched and bent, a brief moment of calm before the chaos ahead. The journey would take several days, and during that time, Carter began to prepare her crew for what was to come. There would be no room for hesitation, no time for second-guessing. Every member of the fleet would need to give their best, even if it seemed like they were the underdogs in a fight they were destined to lose. Meanwhile, in the Exorcan command ship, the aliens watched the human fleet's departure with skepticism. General Jorek, a towering figure with green-scaled skin and glowing yellow eyes, was the one most vocal in his disbelief. "The humans send this," Jorek growled to his subordinates. "This weak fleet. They must think we are fools. We are the ones who requested their help, yet they send us this. Scrap metal. They believe it is the best they can offer," one of his officers replied, cautiously. Jorek scoffed. "If they think this can defeat the Vikor, they are sorely mistaken. Our best is already struggling. These ships will be torn apart." But despite the doubts, Jorek's orders were clear. The Exorcan fleet would remain in orbit around the Exorcan homeworld, waiting for the human fleet's arrival. The Alliance was their last hope, and even if the humans weren't the warriors they had expected, they had little choice but to see it through. Back aboard the Pioneer, Commander Carter and her crew were focused, making sure that every detail was taken care of. She moved between her officers, checking in with them as they worked. "Lieutenant Jackson, how are the engines holding up?" she asked the engineer. "Not great, Commander," Jackson replied with a sigh. "We're running on backup power for a lot of the ship's systems, but I've made some modifications. The engine should hold up for the journey, but we'll need to be careful once we engage with the Vicar. Good. Keep me posted. As the days passed, Carter spent her time studying everything she could about the Vicar. There was little known about them beyond the fact that they adapted to every attack thrown at them. What she did know was that brute force wouldn't work. This battle would be won with strategy, with patience, and with a little bit of luck. And most importantly, with creativity. Humanity's strength had always been in their ability to adapt to any situation, and this would be no different. It wasn't until they neared the Xorcan front lines that the crew began to feel the weight of the mission. The silence in the command center grew heavier with every passing minute. Everyone knew what was at stake, but none of them fully understood just how dangerous the Vicar truly were. Commander Carter stood at the bridge window, looking out at the stars ahead. She had no illusions about their chances. The fleet they were bringing wasn't strong or advanced, but she had a plan, and it was a plan based on something the Xorcan didn't understand: the human will to survive. "We're ready," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "Let's show them what humans can really do." The stars outside the Pioneers' viewports were nothing like the comforting, familiar lights of Earth's night sky. Here, in the uncharted depths of space, they seemed distant and cold, each one a reminder of how far they were from home. Commander Bethany Carter stood at the center of the bridge, watching as her fleet moved closer to the Xorcan homeworld. It was almost time to make contact with the Vicar. "We're almost there, Commander," Lieutenant Ross said, his voice steady but tinged with the excitement that everyone was feeling. "The Xorcan fleet has confirmed their position. We'll be entering the battle zone in a few minutes." Carter nodded without looking away from the vast emptiness outside. She had done her best to prepare her crew, but nothing could fully prepare them for what they were about to face. She glanced around the bridge at her officers. They were all in position, working as smoothly as they could. Each person had a specific role to play, and they had practiced their routines until they were instinctive. But there was still a nervous energy that couldn't be shaken. "We stick to the plan," Carter said firmly. "We will move in fast, disrupt their lines, and then fall back. Keep the Vicar guessing. We're not here to fight a head-on battle. We're here to confuse them." The crew nodded, but even as Carter spoke, she knew that the Vicar would be different from anything they had ever encountered. They were not like the Xorcan, who fought with pride and power. The Vicar were methodical, cold, and ruthlessly efficient. The first sign of the Vicar was a distant flash of light, like a star flickering in the dark. Then, like a ripple in the void, their ships appeared, countless, vast, and seemingly endless. There was no leader, no central command ship. The Vicar didn't need one. They were a collective, each ship part of an enormous shifting hive mind. "Holy!" Lieutenant Jackson gasped, his eyes wide. "How many are there? We can't even count them." Carter's heart sank as she saw the full scale of the Vicar forces. The Xorcan had warned them, but nothing could prepare her for the sight. The Vicar ships were sleek and unsettling, their hulls almost organic, like they had been grown instead of built. They moved as one, shifting and adapting in a way that felt unnatural. "Steady," Carter said, forcing herself to stay calm. "We're not going to fight them all. We're going to make them think we're more than we are." The human fleet was positioned far behind the Xorcan forces, but Carter knew that this was no time for caution. She gave the order, and the fleet began to move forward. The Pioneer and the other ships angled toward the front, weaving in and out of the Xorcan lines to create confusion. The Vicar didn't hesitate. They immediately engaged, firing their energy weapons with deadly precision. The Xorcan ships were powerful, but even they couldn't stand up to the speed and flexibility of the Vicar. The battle was already unfolding in a blur of explosions and flashing lights. Then the Pioneer hit its first target. Carter had instructed the crew to launch a series of quick, precise strikes on the outer edges of the Vicar fleet, using their old, smaller ships to their advantage. The Pioneer fired its aging weapons, hitting a Vicar ship that had been lagging behind. The blast wasn't much compared to the full strength of a modern fleet, but it was enough to cause a ripple in the enemy's lines. For a moment, it looked like the human fleet might have caught the Vikur off guard. The enemy ships shifted, reorienting themselves to counter the unexpected attack. But as soon as they adapted, they began to fire back with overwhelming force. A few smaller ships in the fleet were hit, and the Eagle was forced to retreat. "Pull back," Carter ordered. "Regroup at the edge of the battlefield." The human fleet began to withdraw, but not without leaving an impression. The Vikur, while quick to adapt, were still thrown off by the humans' unconventional tactics. It wasn't about fighting them directly. It was about creating enough confusion to slow them down. The Xorcan fleet, meanwhile, remained at the center of the battle, trying to hold their ground. But even their vast power was no match for the Vikur's ability to learn and adapt. The human fleet had been small, but they had used that size to their advantage. Carter watched the battlefield unfold, her mind working fast. The Vikur were adapting, but they weren't unbeatable. There had to be a way to get inside their minds, to disrupt their hive mind. That was the key. If the Vikur were a collective, then perhaps they could be divided. "Lieutenant Ross, start sending out false signals," Carter said, her eyes narrowing. "Create confusion within their communication network. If we can disrupt their coordination, we'll have a chance." Ross nodded and quickly began typing commands into his console. "Working on it, Commander." The next few minutes felt like hours. The Vikur were relentless, their ships tearing into the Xorcan lines, but the human fleet kept shifting and dodging, never staying in one place long enough for the Vikur to get a clean shot. Then something unexpected happened. The Pioneer's shields flickered as a Vikur ship got too close. The enemy vessel moved in with alarming speed, its weapons charging. But before it could fire, a series of false signals from the Pioneer caused the Vikur ship to hesitate, just for a split second. That hesitation was all Carter needed. She ordered the fleet to turn sharply and move to a new location, throwing off the Vikur's targeting systems. "Nice work," Carter muttered, her eyes scanning the battlefield. "Let's keep it up." As the battle raged on, the human fleet began to realize that they weren't outmatched after all. It wasn't about firepower, it was about strategy. And for the first time, the Vikur were starting to question whether their superiority was as absolute as they thought. The human fleet had successfully pulled back, but they knew this was only the beginning. The Vikur, though momentarily confused, were already adjusting their tactics. Their ability to adapt to every strategy made them dangerous. The next move would be crucial. Commander Bethany Carter stood at the helm of the Pioneer, looking at the swirling chaos of the battlefield. The Xorcan forces were struggling, but their enemy, the Vikur, were even more relentless than anticipated. Their ships moved like fluid, organic creatures, constantly shifting and adapting in response to every attack. "They're changing formations," Lieutenant Ross said, his fingers flying over the console. "They're starting to use their hive mind more effectively. They're not reacting to us. They're predicting our movements." Carter's heart sank. If the Vikur could predict their actions, then the battle would be over before it even began. The human fleet was small and outdated, but their one advantage was the unpredictability of their tactics. If the Vikur could read their moves, that advantage would vanish. "We need to change things up," Carter said, thinking fast. "Lieutenant Jackson, prepare the Pioneer for evasive maneuvers. We're going to move in close to their lines, then break off quickly. We'll keep them guessing." "Yes, Commander," Jackson responded, already shifting his focus to the ship's engines. Carter turned to her crew. "Remember, our goal isn't to win in strength, it's to outsmart them." The Pioneer moved forward once more, darting through the battlefield with impressive speed. The other ships followed, staying in close formation but ready to scatter at a moment's notice. The Vikur ships, still in perfect coordination, began to close in, trying to anticipate their next move. The tension was thick. The Vikur ships were gaining on them, and Carter knew they didn't have much time. She had to act quickly or risk being surrounded. But just as she was about to give the order to scatter, something unexpected happened. A Vikur ship broke away from the main formation and charged straight at them, faster than Carter had thought possible. It was unlike the other ships, larger, more aggressive, with weapons that looked far more advanced. "Commander, we have a new target," Lieutenant Ross shouted, his voice filled with alarm. "It's breaking away from the hive. This one's different." Carter gritted her teeth. "It's probably their leader. It's going to be hard to outmaneuver this one, but we can't let it break through." She gave the order for the Pioneer to change course, and the ship swerved sharply to avoid a direct hit. The Vikur leader's ship fired, sending a beam of energy toward the Pioneer. The ship's shields flared, taking the brunt of the attack, but the force still rattled the crew. "Shields at 70%. Jackson called out from the engine room. "We need to finish this quickly," Carter muttered, her mind racing. The leader's ship wasn't just stronger, it was more intelligent. It wasn't following the hive mind's usual tactics. It was thinking, planning. The Pioneer fired back with its outdated weapons, but the Vikur leader's ship dodged with ease, twisting and turning in a way no human ship could match. Carter clenched her fists. They needed something unexpected, something the Vikur couldn't predict. "Lieutenant Ross, prepare the decoy," Carter ordered. A decoy wasn't part of the Pioneer's usual arsenal, but it had been hastily installed before the mission. It was a simple system that emitted false readings, mimicking the ship's energy signature. It wouldn't fool the Vikur for long, but it might buy them enough time. Ross didn't hesitate. "Activating now." The Pioneer fired off a burst of energy that caused the Vikur leader's ship to hesitate for a moment. The decoy pulsed with energy, creating multiple false readings that confused the enemy. For a brief moment, the leader's ship couldn't tell which signal was real. Taking advantage of the momentary confusion, Carter ordered the fleet to break formation. The Pioneer shot forward, weaving through enemy fire, and struck a glancing blow to the Vikur leader's ship. It wasn't a direct hit, but it was enough to disrupt the Vikur's targeting systems. The leader's ship staggered, momentarily thrown off course. The Pioneer quickly moved into a new position, and the rest of the fleet followed suit. They began to surround the Vikur leader's ship, forcing it to retreat back into the larger Vikur formation. "Got it," Carter said, her voice calm but determined. "Now, let's make our exit. All ships, prepare for evasive maneuvers." The Vikur leader's ship began to regain its composure, but it was already too late. The human fleet, though small and outmatched, had thrown the Vikur off their game. The hive mind was scrambling to adjust, but for the first time, it seemed uncertain. "We did it, Commander," Ross said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and disbelief. "They're retreating." Carter exhaled slowly, a rare smile crossing her face. "Not yet, but they're beginning to doubt themselves. That's the first step." The fleet didn't let up. They quickly moved to a safe distance, leaving the Vikur leader's ship and the rest of the fleet to regroup. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, the humans had gained a small victory. They hadn't defeated the Vikur, but they had done something far more important. They had made the Vikur realize that their superiority might not be as certain as they believed. "Report," Carter said, turning to Lieutenant Jackson. "Shields are down to 45%, but we're still operational," he replied. "We've taken some hits, but nothing critical." "Good. Let's regroup and get ready for whatever comes next. The Vikur won't back down easily, but neither will we." As the human fleet moved into position, Carter couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Vikur were fierce and adaptable, but humanity had proven that they could think on their feet. The Vikur might have the upper hand in numbers, but the humans had something more. They had the will to fight, no matter the odds. The battle had shifted. Commander Bethany Carter stood on the bridge of the Pioneer, staring out into the dark expanse of space. The Vikur, after their brief hesitation, had regrouped and were now advancing with renewed intensity. The small human fleet had made an impact, But that impact hadn't gone unnoticed. The Vikor were adjusting their tactics once again, and this time, the humans weren't sure they could keep up. "They're adapting faster than we anticipated," Lieutenant Ross said, his voice filled with concern. His fingers danced over the controls, monitoring the movements of the enemy fleet. "It's like they can learn from every move we make. They're responding quicker." Carter nodded, watching as the Vikor ships moved like an unshakable wall, their formations growing tighter and more synchronized. It was clear that they had studied the human tactics from earlier, and now they were using that knowledge to counter every attempt to outmaneuver them. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Carter ordered. "We need to break their lines again. Find a weak point." Jackson, the engineer, was already at work, guiding the Pioneer through the vast expanse. The engines hummed as the ship shifted into a high-speed evasive pattern, darting to the left, then right. The rest of the fleet followed suit, scattering to create confusion among the Vikor forces. "They're not fooled," Lieutenant Ross said, his eyes wide as he watched the Vikor ships begin to separate, anticipating their next move. "They're trying to corner us." Carter's mind raced. She knew the Vikor were adaptable, but their speed and ability to predict the fleet's movements were becoming overwhelming. They needed something to throw them off once more. "Lieutenant Ross," Carter said, a thought forming in her mind. "Can you hack into their communication network? Disrupt their hive mind, even for a few moments?" Ross looked at her, surprised. "You think we can break into their systems? I can try, but their network is unlike anything we've ever seen. It's like it's everywhere." "We don't need to break it completely," Carter replied, her eyes hard with resolve. "Just long enough to buy us some time. If we can create enough of a disruption, we might be able to slip past their defenses." Ross hesitated for a moment before nodding. "I'll give it a shot." Carter turned to Jackson. "How are the shields holding up?" "Shields are at 60%, Jackson replied quickly. "We've taken some hits, but nothing critical yet. We can last a little longer if we keep moving." "Good. Keep us moving." The Pioneer darted to the left again, moving faster now as Ross worked frantically to gain access to the Vikor's network. His fingers flew over his console as he tried to break through the Vikor's strange system of communication, one that seemed to span the entire fleet, making every ship a part of the collective. "Got it," Ross said suddenly, a hint of triumph in his voice. "I've broken through their outer network. They're going to feel some interference. Just a few seconds." "Perfect," Carter said. "Now, all ships, full speed ahead. We're taking the fight to them." In that moment, Carter could feel the weight of the decision. The Vikor were close to being able to predict every move. If they could break their coordination, it would be their only shot at surviving the next few minutes. The fleet moved forward, cutting through the dark void of space. As they closed in on the Vikor ships, Carter could feel the tension in the air. She knew that this would be their last chance to make a move before the Vikor regained control. The fleet approached the enemy lines. The Vikor ships, still reeling from the temporary disruption, struggled to regroup. Some ships slowed, confused by the interference, while others attempted to retreat. The moment was fleeting, but it was enough. The human fleet pressed forward with everything they had. "Firing," Lieutenant Ross called out, and the Pioneer launched a volley of energy blasts, aiming for a gap in the Vikor's formations. The Vikor ships took the hits, their shields flickering under the strain. It wasn't enough to destroy them, but it forced them back, giving the human fleet a moment to break through. The Vikor leader's ship, the one that had been more advanced than the rest, was still in the fray, trying to reorganize the hive mind. But it was clear that it was struggling. The interference had made their coordination falter, and for the first time in the battle, Carter saw a glimmer of hope. "Now's our chance," Carter said firmly. "Focus all fire on the leader's ship. We'll take it down." The Pioneer's weapons hummed with energy as it locked onto the Vikor leader's ship. The rest of the fleet followed suit, concentrating their firepower on the large, agile enemy vessel. The Vikor ship began to dodge and weave, but the humans had already anticipated its movements. With each shot, the Vicar leader's ship began to show signs of damage. "Shields failing," Jackson reported. "We've got them on the run." Carter's heart pounded as she saw the damage piling up on the Vicar leader's ship. For the first time, the humans had the upper hand. The Vicar leader's ship was backing away, its shields flickering dangerously low. It wasn't retreating. It was waiting, preparing for a final strike. "We can't let up now," Carter said, her voice steady. "All ships, continue firing. We can't let them regroup." The Pioneer and the other ships in the fleet pressed their attack, focusing every weapon they had on the Vicar leader's ship. It began to break apart, the once indestructible vessel crumbling under the relentless barrage. And then, with one final burst, the Vicar leader's ship exploded, sending a shockwave through the battlefield. "Direct hit," Lieutenant Ross said with a grin. "We've got them." But Carter didn't allow herself to celebrate. The Vicar were still out there. The battle wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The victory over the Vicar leader's ship had shaken the enemy, but Commander Bethany Carter knew this was just the beginning of a much larger conflict. The human fleet, though smaller and weaker compared to the Vicar, had made a significant dent in their forces. Still, the Vicar weren't giving up. They were reorganizing, adapting once again. And this time, the battle would be even harder. Carter stood at the command center of the Pioneer, her gaze fixed on the holographic map of the battlefield. The scattered remnants of the Vicar fleet were regrouping, forming new, unpredictable patterns. They were learning, adjusting their tactics to counter every move the humans made. "Commander, we've got reports of another wave of Vicar ships approaching," Lieutenant Ross said, his voice tense. "They're coming in faster this time, and they've shifted their strategy. They're focusing more on speed and precision." Carter clenched her fists. The Vicar had been thrown off by the destruction of their leader's ship, but now they were adjusting faster than ever. The humans didn't have much time before the enemy gained control again. "How much time do we have before they engage?" Carter asked, trying to keep her voice steady. 5 minutes at most," Ross replied. "They've already shifted into attack formation." Carter's mind raced. They had no choice now but to face the Vicar head-on. The human fleet's resources were limited, and they couldn't afford to retreat. They had to stand and fight. "Prepare all weapons," Carter ordered. "I want every ship in formation. We're going to hit them hard before they can fully regroup. They've shown they can adapt, but we've still got the element of surprise." Jackson, the ship's chief engineer, turned from his console. "We've made some repairs to the shields, Commander, but we're still running low on power. If we take another heavy hit, we won't be able to hold out." "We'll make it work," Carter said, determination in her voice. "If we fall back now, we lose. If we fight, we stand a chance." The fleet prepared for battle, the ships forming a tight, coordinated group as they began their approach toward the Vicar forces. The Vicar had clearly been expecting a retreat. They were still spread out, trying to reorganize. This was their moment. The Pioneer surged forward with the rest of the fleet behind it. The Vicar ships, realizing the humans weren't running, began to adjust their formations quickly, but it was too late. The human ships were already closing in, their weapons charging. "Fire!" Carter shouted. The Pioneer unleashed a powerful blast of energy, followed by a barrage from the other ships in the fleet. The first wave of Vicar ships exploded into sparks, their shields unable to withstand the concentrated fire. The humans pressed on, not stopping for a moment. "They're scrambling to adjust," Ross called out. "They didn't expect this kind of attack." "Good. Let's keep them guessing," Carter said, a slight grin on her face. But just as the humans gained some ground, the Vicar ships shifted once more. They began to break apart into smaller, more agile units, moving at incredible speeds. It was clear they had learned from their previous mistake of staying in tight formations. Now, the Vicar were harder to hit and more difficult to predict. "Commander, they've divided into smaller groups," Lieutenant Ross said. They're moving in a way that's hard to counter. It's like they've gotten smarter. Carter's mind raced. She had seen this tactic before in other battles. Dividing into smaller units would make the Vikor fleet harder to hit, but it also meant they would have less power behind each attack. Stay focused, Carter said. We need to pick off their smaller ships one by one. We can't let them swarm us. The fleet adjusted its tactics, spreading out to avoid being surrounded. They focused their fire on the small, fast-moving Vikor ships, taking down one after another. It wasn't easy. These ships were built for speed and evasion, and the humans had to use every trick in the book to stay ahead of them. As the battle raged on, the Vikors seemed to grow more frantic, unable to get a clear upper hand. Carter could see it in their movements. They were adapting, but it was like they were running out of options. The human fleet was small, but they had one advantage the Vikor couldn't predict: their creativity. Carter's eyes narrowed as she watched a Vikor ship dart toward the Pioneer. It was fast, too fast for the human ship to dodge. Brace for impact, Jackson yelled. The ship rocked violently as the Vikor vessel collided with the Pioneer. The shields flickered, barely holding up under the strain. Shields are down to 30%, Jackson shouted. We've got a hull breach on Deck 4. Carter's heart raced. The Pioneer had taken a serious hit, but this wasn't the time to panic. The Vikor were still closing in, and they had to finish this battle before they were overwhelmed. Seal Deck 4, Carter ordered. We're not letting them break through. All ships, keep up the pressure. Take down the Vikor in front of us. The Pioneer fought through the pain of the hit, pushing forward even as alarms blared throughout the ship. The rest of the fleet followed suit, focusing on the Vikor ships that had gotten too close. One by one, the smaller enemy ships were destroyed, and the larger Vikor vessels began to retreat. Commander, we're winning, Ross said, his voice full of disbelief. They're pulling back. Carter let out a slow breath, watching as the Vikor began to retreat. They had done it. They had taken down wave after wave, forcing the Vikor to reconsider their strategy. But Carter knew this wasn't over. The Vikor were not a race that gave up easily. They would regroup, adapt, and come back stronger, and the humans would be ready. We've won today, Carter said, turning to her crew. But we're not done yet. This war is far from over. The battle was not over, but it was changing. The Vikor had retreated, pulling back to regroup, and Commander Bethany Carter could feel the pressure building. The human fleet had made it through another wave, but the cost was high. The Pioneer had suffered damage, and the smaller ships in the fleet were beginning to show signs of wear. Despite the victory, the crew knew that the Vikor would not stay down for long. They were regrouping, and they would be back, stronger and more determined. Carter stood at the command center, her eyes scanning the holographic map of the battlefield. The Vikor had retreated to the far edge of the system, and now they were waiting. The human fleet had taken a small victory, but it felt like a fragile one. The Vikor were a relentless enemy, and they were learning quickly from every engagement. Commander, Lieutenant Ross said, breaking her thoughts. We've detected movement. The Vikor are forming up again. It looks like they're preparing for a counterattack. Carter's brow furrowed. How long do we have? Not long, Ross replied. Their ships are already making their way toward us. We're running out of time. Carter turned to her crew. The Pioneer and the rest of the human fleet had fought valiantly, but it was clear that this next wave would be their hardest challenge yet. The Vikor were not just powerful. They were fast, intelligent, and adapting faster than the humans could anticipate. If the humans didn't act now, they would be overwhelmed. We're going to need everything we got, Carter said, her voice steady. We're not going to give them an inch. We're going to take the fight to them, and we're going to end this. Her crew nodded, determination in their eyes. Jackson, the chief engineer, turned to her, his expression serious. We've done all we can with the ship's systems. Shields are at 40%. The weapons are recharged, but we won't be able to take another hit like last time. Carter's mind raced. Can we reinforce the shields? It's possible, but it'll drain the power reserves, Jackson said. We'll be running on minimal power if we do that. No room for error. Carter looked at the rest of her crew. They had fought hard, but they were running on empty. Yet the thought of retreating wasn't even an option. They had come this far, and now they had to finish what they had started. Do it, Carter ordered. We don't have any other choice. Jackson nodded and began making adjustments. Carter turned her attention back to the map. The Viker ships were closing in fast, and she could already see the formation of their attack. They were coming in with overwhelming numbers, hoping to crush the human fleet once and for all. The human ships, though battered, stood firm. Carter had given her crew everything she could, and now it was up to them. As the Viker ships grew nearer, Carter's hand clenched into a fist. She knew they couldn't match the Viker in firepower, but they had something the enemy didn't, the will to fight. And that, she hoped, would be enough. Let's go, Carter said, her voice cutting through the tension. All ships, form up and prepare for battle. The Pioneer surged forward with the rest of the fleet, charging straight into the Viker assault. The Viker ships, sensing the challenge, closed in with deadly intent. But this time, the humans weren't retreating. They weren't running. They were standing their ground. The first volley of energy blasts erupted into space, the sound of the explosions reverberating through the hull of the Pioneer. The human fleet fired back with everything they had. The battle raged on, each side exchanging fire, neither willing to give in. Shields holding at 30%, Jackson reported. We're taking damage, but we're still in the fight. Carter watched as the Viker ships moved with precision, their weapons tearing through the human fleet. The Pioneer rocked under the impact, but it stayed on course. Carter knew the ship wouldn't last much longer if they didn't find a way to turn the tide. We can't keep this up for much longer, Lieutenant Ross said, his voice urgent. They're too strong. We need to find a weakness. Carter scanned the enemy fleet. They were faster, more coordinated, and far more numerous. But Carter had seen something earlier, a slight hesitation in the Viker's movements. It was subtle, but it was there. They were pushing hard, but they weren't as sure of themselves as they had been before. Focus fire on their command ship, Carter ordered. If we take it down, the rest of their fleet might fall apart. The Pioneer and the other ships in the fleet concentrated their fire on the largest of the Viker ships, the command ship. The Viker leader's vessel had been destroyed, but this ship seemed to be the heart of their operation. It was heavily shielded, but it was also the most vulnerable. The human fleet fired relentlessly, targeting the command ship's weak spots. It took everything they had, but finally, the ship's shields began to falter. A powerful shot from the Pioneer hit its core, and the ship exploded in a burst of brilliant light. Direct hit, Ross shouted. The command ship is down. For a moment, there was silence. The remaining Viker ships hesitated, their coordination faltering. Carter watched as the fleet's once unified assault started to break apart. Without the command ship, the Viker forces were beginning to lose their edge. We've done it, Jackson said, disbelief in his voice. But Carter didn't let herself relax. Not yet. There are still ships out there. We need to finish them off. The human fleet pressed forward, taking advantage of the Viker disarray. The remaining enemy ships, without the command structure to guide them, began to fall apart. One by one, they were destroyed, their once formidable force breaking down under the human assault. In the end, the humans had won. The Viker fleet, now scattered and leaderless, was retreating. The battle had been long, and the cost had been high, but the humans had done it. They had defeated an enemy that seemed invincible. Carter stood in silence, her heart still racing from the battle. The crew around her was exhausted, but they had done it. They had won. This is only the beginning, Carter said, her voice steady. But today, we've shown the Viker that they can't break us, and we will keep fighting.